The messenger hit my phone at 9:70 p.m. and for 10 seconds I forgot how to breathe like a normal person. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was reckless, it was worse that the quiet, simple, and impossible to explain away. Mike, thanks.
I shouldn't be saying this, but I'm glad it was you. I read it once. Then again. Then I set the phone down like it might burn my palm, stared at the cracked ceiling of my apartment, and listened to the refrigerator hum until the silence started to feel loud. My name is Mike Harlan. I was 38 then, old enough to know life doesn't change in clean, movie-style chapters. It shifts in small humiliations, in quiet decisions, in nights when you eat over the sink because the table feels too honest. I'd been divorced 3 years, one of those polite divorces that ends neatly on paper and keeps echoing in your head. No kids. No screaming fights. Just two decent people realizing they'd become strangers and choosing to stop pretending otherwise. During the day, I worked operations at Hartwell Logistics. I wasn't a manager who gave speeches. I was the guy who kept the wheels from falling off. Routes, vendors, late shipments, angry clients. The kind of work people only notice when it goes wrong. And above all of it, on the top floor with the glass walls and the quiet confidence, was our CEO, Valerie Cross. 47. Sharp, composed, the sort of woman who could end a heated debate by lifting an eyebrow and letting the silence do the rest. I'd spoken to Valerie maybe 4 times in 7 years, always about a crisis, always in sentences that sounded like reports. She'd nod, decide, and move on, and I'd go back to being the guy in the background. If my life had stayed inside office hours, none of this would have happened. But I'd picked up a side gig delivering food on weekends, partly for extra cash, mostly because empty evenings were starting to feel like punishment. I kept it quiet at work. In a building full of titles, a second job sounded like weakness. I liked the motion of it, the steering wheel under my hands, the city lights, the brief exchanges at doors. No small talk required. Just drop off, a nod, and the night keeps moving. That Saturday was cold and clear, the kind of night when the sky looks scrub clean. Around 8:30, I accepted an order without thinking and drove into a quiet neighborhood where the houses sat back from the street like they had secrets. The app didn't show names, only an address. When I pulled up, the porch light clicked on before I reached the steps, like someone had been watching the map. The door opened and the world tilted by half an inch. Valerie Cross stood there in a soft sweater and dark jeans, hair loose instead of pinned. No heels, no blazer, no armor. For a second my brain refused to connect her to the woman from the boardroom. She looked human. Tired, maybe. Or relieved. Her eyes flicked to the bag in my hand, and then to my face, and I saw the exact moment she recognized me too. The recognition wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Evening. I manage because that's what my mouth does when it panics. Polite, useless words. Delivery. She didn't smile, not really. But something in her expression softened, like a knot loosening. "Thank you," she said, taking the bag carefully, as if it contained more than food. Behind her, the house was warm and quiet. No voices. No television. Just the faint scent of lemon cleaner and something cooked hours ago. The kind of place that's expensive and lonely at the same time. I should have left right then. A normal guy would have. But she held the door a beat longer than necessary. And in that pause, I felt the strange pull of being seen by someone who usually saw only numbers and outcomes. "Everything all right?" I asked before I could stop myself. It wasn't flirting. It was habit. Operations guys fix problems. Her gaze stayed on me. "Not particularly," she said. So softly, it barely traveled past the porch. Then she added, "But thank you for being punctual." It was a joke. Almost. Coming from her, it sounded like a confession. I walked back to my car with my heart doing a job it hadn't done in years. I told myself it was nothing, an awkward coincidence, a weird footnote I'd forget by Monday. I even laughed once, alone in the driver's seat, at how ridiculous it was. Then, an hour later, her text arrived. That night, I typed 3 different replies and deleted all of them. Anything too warm felt dangerous. Anything too cold felt like a lie. In the end, I left the screen dark and told myself sleep would fix it. It didn't. By morning, my silence had become an answer, and I couldn't tell whether I'd protected her or lost something I'd never had. Because once a woman like Valerie Cross chooses to speak outside the rules, the next question isn't what she wants. It's what it will cost when Monday comes and she looks at me across the conference table like nothing ever happened. Not yet. Monday morning tried to pretend nothing had happened, but my phone betrayed me before I even reached my desk. A new notification sat there like a dare. Valerie Cross, one line, no emojis, no softness, and somehow it felt sharper than the first. I'm in early. If you're free at 7:10, stop by my office. Not about the delivery. I rode the elevator with a travel mug going cold in my hand, watching the numbers climb, feeling 38 in the most specific way, old enough to recognize risk, young enough to still step toward it. Hartwell Logistics woke up with its usual soundtrack: printers, heels on tile, the murmur of people trading weekends for deadlines. I slid into my chair, opened my inbox, and tried to become the dependable operations guy again. It lasted maybe 4 minutes. Dan Riley leaned over the divider with a grin that always meant he'd already made up his mind about whatever he was asking. Mid-40s, ex-Air Force, built like he still did push-ups for fun. He'd been the closest thing I had to a brother since my divorce. "You look like you slept in your car," he said. "I slept," I lied. He tossed a stress ball at my keyboard. "Sure you did." I kept Valerie's message locked behind my eyes. No one at Hartwell needed to know I'd delivered takeout to our CEO's door on a Saturday night. Gossip traveled faster than shipments. At 7:08 p.m., I found myself walking toward the executive wing anyway, my badge feeling heavier than it should. The glass walls up there always made me feel exposed, like my thoughts could be seen if I moved too slowly. Valerie's assistant, Priya, looked up from her screen with a kind of polite smile that warned you not to get comfortable. "She's expecting you," Priya said, and that word, expecting, landed in my chest. Valerie's office was quiet, lit by soft lamps instead of fluorescents. She stood by the window, city lights smeared across the glass behind her. In a suit, she looked untouchable. Tonight the jacket was off, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back again. The CEO had returned. "Mike," she said, turning. "Thank you for coming." "It's fine," I answered, and immediately hated how small it sounded. She didn't invite me to sit. Not as a power move, more like she didn't know what shape this conversation was supposed to take. "I won't keep you," she said. "But I need to be clear about something." My throat tightened. Clear usually meant consequences. "I recognized you," she continued, measured. "And I shouldn't have put you in a position where you had to decide how to respond. That message last night, it was unprofessional." She paused, eyes steady. "But it was honest." Honest. The word hit harder than any apology. For years I'd been surrounded by corporate language designed to hide feelings behind efficiency. Valerie's honesty felt like someone opening a window in a room I'd accepted as airless. I didn't know what to say, I admitted. So I said nothing. "I noticed," she said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Then she surprised me. "I'm not asking for a reply. I'm asking for discretion." That was the moment I understood the real risk wasn't romance. It was humiliation. It was her reputation. It was my job. It was the possibility that one careless sentence could turn her into a headline in the break room and turn me into a punchline. "You'll have it," I said. "From me." Her shoulders lowered a fraction, like she'd been holding her breath since Saturday. She moved to her desk and slid a folder toward me. "This is why I asked you here," she said. "We have a distribution contract coming up for renewal. I want your assessment before tomorrow's board call. Not the polished version. The real one." I blinked. "Why me?" "Because you don't flatter," she said. "And because you see problems before they become disasters." Her gaze flicked to my face, softer for a heartbeat. "I trust you." When I left, Priya's eyes followed me, curious. Down the hall, I nearly collided with Kyle Mercer, 30-something, perfect teeth, the kind of rising star who wore confidence like cologne. He'd been circling Valerie for months with helpful suggestions that always seemed to land in her email first. Well, look at that, Kyle said, smiling too widely. Late meeting with the boss? Work, I said, walking past. Kyle's voice stayed light, but his eyes didn't. Sure it is. Back at my desk, Dan was still there, packing up. He took one look at my face and went quiet. Something happened? I shook my head. Just more work. Dan studied me, then nodded like he'd filed it away for later. Careful with more work, Mike. In this place, it has teeth. At 9:17 p.m., my phone lit again. Valerie. One sentence. Thank you for handling today the way you did. I stared at it, feeling the boundary shift, just an inch, but enough to change the whole map. Then I typed slowly, "You're welcome." And "You're not alone in this." Outside, the parking lot was empty, but I could still feel Kyle's eyes, and tomorrow waiting. The rumor started as a joke, the way most damage does. I heard it before lunch, not in a meeting, not in an email, just a laugh near the coffee machine. "Guess who's got a private line to Valerie now?" someone said. Another voice answered, "Must be nice to be noticed." I kept walking like my name wasn't the one hanging in the air, but my pulse didn't believe the act. I was 38, not new enough to be naive and not powerful enough to be untouchable. At Hartwell, people didn't need proof. They needed a story they could repeat. And I had accidentally become one. The timing couldn't have been worse. The contract renewal Valerie handed me was the kind of thing that decided careers, big numbers board attention, vendors who smiled while sharpening knives. If my analysis was wrong, it wouldn't just embarrass me. It would cost money. So I buried myself in spreadsheets and shipping logs, telling myself focus was safety. But even numbers started to feel personal when I knew a single rumor could turn me into that guy. It didn't help that Valerie had gone quiet. After that late meeting, our messages stayed careful until they stopped. In the office, she looked the same as ever, composed, efficient, eyes that could cut through noise without raising her voice. But on the board call, she used my title instead of my name. "Operations will handle it," she said, like I was a department, not a person. Kyle Mercer noticed everything. He started showing up wherever I was, always with that polished smile and a question that sounded innocent. "How's the renewal analysis going?" "Valerie seemed pleased with your work. Must feel good." He said it softly, like advice, but he aimed the words like darts. The worst part was that people listened. I'd been through enough to recognize the pattern. My marriage hadn't ended with betrayal or drama. It ended with two people avoiding hard conversations until silence became the only language left. Rumors work the same way. No one asked you directly. They just waited for you to flinch. Dan caught me staring at my phone that afternoon, thumb hovering over Valerie's last message like it was a loose thread I didn't dare pull. He didn't ask for details. He just said, "You're walking around like you're braced for impact." "Maybe I am," I muttered. He leaned back. "Then keep your hands clean. Around here, one rumor becomes a policy." By Thursday, the whispers had grown bold. They followed me through hallways, slipped into silence when I entered a room. Priya stopped meeting my eyes. In the break room, a junior analyst I barely knew offered me a grin that was too friendly. "Hey, Mike," he said. "Big week for you, huh?" That night, I drove deliveries again, not for money, just to move, to feel like I still belonged to a world where people only cared about the right address. Around 9, the app sent me to a familiar neighborhood. My stomach tightened when the map turned onto Valerie Street. I sat at the curb, engine idling, staring at the porch light. If I walked up there, it would mean something. If I didn't, it would also mean something. I carried the bag to the door anyway. Valerie opened it herself. She looked tired in a way no suit could hide, face drawn, eyes a shade darker than usual. Her gaze met mine, and for a moment the office vanished. "I didn't order under my name," she said, low and careful. "I figured," I replied. "You've been quiet." Her eyes flicked past me into the dark street, as if expecting someone to be watching. "They're talking," she said, flat and resigned. "I haven't said a word," I told her. "I know," she said. "That's why this is harder." She didn't invite me in. She just held the door like a boundary. "I built this company by being predictable," she said, "by never giving anyone a reason to question my judgment." Her voice thinned on the last word, as if it cost her. I've paid for mistakes before. I don't intend to pay again. There it was, the past barely visible. Not a confession, not a sob story. A warning. I don't want to be your problem, I said, and it came out rougher than I meant. Her eyes softened, just a fraction. You're not a problem, Mike. You're a complication I didn't plan for. For a second, something flickered behind her control. Loneliness, maybe. Then it was gone. I should go, I said. She nodded once. That would be wise. I walked back to my car with my shoulders tight. Before I started the engine, my phone buzzed. A company-wide email. Kyle copied the executive team on a concern about process transparency, framing it like a safeguard. He didn't mention my name. He didn't need to. I stared at the screen, then opened a blank message to Valerie and typed 3 lines. Deleted them. Typed again. In the end, I wrote the only thing that felt honest and survivable. I'll keep my distance. For your sake. I hit send and sat there in the dark, realizing that in trying not to hurt her, I might have just hurt myself the most. I wrote my resignation letter at 2:06 a.m., then stared at it until the cursor stopped blinking and the words started to look like someone else's life. 2 paragraphs. Clean, professional, bloodless. Effective immediately, sat there like a cliff. I didn't send it. Not because I was brave, because I was scared of what it would mean if I did. Leaving would prove the rumor. Staying would keep feeding it. By the time the sun came up, I'd slept maybe 40 minutes in a shallow, anxious doze. The kind where you wake up already tense, already behind. I shaved anyway, put on a shirt that still smelled faintly like detergent, and drove to Hartwell with that numb determination you get when you're trying to outpace your own thoughts. I was 38, and I'd spent most of my adult life believing the safest way to live was to be useful and quiet. Do your job, don't cause waves, don't ask for anything you can't control. That strategy kept me employed. It did not keep me happy. And now it didn't even keep me safe. The moment I stepped onto our floor, I felt it. The strange hush that wasn't really a hush. Conversations didn't stop. They just changed shape. People glanced up, then down. Phones went face down on desks. A few nodded at me like I was a man headed into bad weather. Kyle Mercer was waiting near the conference room, leaning casually against the wall, his badge clipped perfectly straight. He looked rested, which meant he'd enjoyed my misery. "Morning, Mike," he said, friendly enough for witnesses. "Big day." "What day is that?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He smiled wider. "Transparency Day." Valerie asked for a review of certain workflows. He lowered his voice by half an inch. "You know how it is. When leadership wants to make sure nothing inappropriate is influencing decisions." There it was. He never said the word, but he made sure I heard it anyway. I walked past him without answering, but my hands were shaking when I got to my desk. Dan came over with 2 coffees and set one down in front of me like an offering. "Don't do anything dumb," he said quietly. "I wasn't planning to," I muttered. Dan's expression didn't change. "Good. Because people like Kyle count on you doing something dumb." The executive review hit at 10. Not a formal investigation, something cleaner and more corporate, designed to look like prudence while feeling like punishment. Priya sent a calendar invite to half the department. Process audit, operation support. Kyle was included. I was included. Valerie was not. That detail rattled me more than anything. If she wasn't even showing up, it meant one of 2 things. She was protecting herself, or she'd been pushed out of the decision. Either way, I was standing alone in a room full of people who would be careful with their words and careless with my name. I sat through the first 20 minutes like I was watching someone else's trial. A compliance manager asked questions with a neutral smile. Kyle answered with eager clarity. Every time he spoke, he angled his body slightly toward the door, like he expected Valerie to appear and reward him. Then the compliance manager pulled up my contract analysis, the one Valerie had asked for privately, and asked, "Can you confirm who requested this assessment and why it bypassed the usual chain?" My throat tightened. There it was. Not romance. Not gossip. Process. A rumor dressed up as policy. I could have lied. I could have hidden behind procedure. But I'd watched my marriage die by 1,000 soft evasions. I couldn't do it again. Valerie requested it, I said, because the usual chain was already compromised. We were missing late fee patterns and vendor penalties. I caught it in the routing logs. Kyle's jaw twitched. That's quite an accusation, he said. It's not an accusation, I replied. It's data. I can show it. The room went quiet, not shocked quiet, but attentive quiet. The kind that meant people had expected drama and got competence instead. I pulled up the numbers, the timestamps, the missed flags. I wasn't defending myself anymore. I was doing what I'd always done, keeping the wheels from falling off. When the compliance manager finally nodded and said, "This looks thorough," Kyle's smile lost its shine. But he recovered fast. "Of course it is," he said. "Mike's always been reliable. The concern is perception." Perception. That word made heat rise behind my eyes. At noon I didn't eat. I walked to the stairwell and sat on the cool concrete steps, phone in my hand, staring at the last message I'd sent Valerie. "I'll keep my distance. For your sake." It looked noble on a screen. In real life, it felt like abandonment. I typed. Deleted. Typed again. My fingers hovered. The idea of reaching out felt like stepping onto thin ice. Yet staying silent felt worse, like letting someone drown because the water might be cold. So I wrote the only thing I could live with. Not romantic. Not demanding. Just true. I'm not asking you to explain anything. I'm not asking for anything at all. But I need to say this. I respect you more than I respect my comfort. And I won't let rumors turn you into someone who hides. If you want distance, I'll give it. If you want honesty, I'm here. I hit send before fear could talk me out of it. For 3 hours there was nothing. The afternoon dragged like wet cloth. I answered emails. I nodded in meetings. I watched Kyle whisper with 2 managers near the printer. I watched Priya walk past my desk twice, then a third time, like she was deciding something. At 4:58 p.m., my phone buzzed. One line. From Valerie. "Meet me at the freight entrance at 6:15. No assistance. No calendars." My lungs emptied on their own, like my body had been holding breath for days. I stared at the screen until the words stopped looking real. Then I locked my phone, stood up, and realized the next decision wouldn't be made by rumors or policy. It would be made by 2 people who were tired of living like everything important had to be hidden. At 6:14 p.m., the freight entrance smelled like rain and cardboard, and my hands wouldn't stop trembling no matter how tightly I curled them into fists. The whole building had emptied out the way it always did. Lights dimmed, elevators quiet, the city outside beginning to glow. I stood under the overhang near the loading bay, listening to a distant forklift beep somewhere inside, and tried to prepare for every possible version of what could happen next. I was 38, the same age my father had been when he stopped taking risks and started calling it wisdom. I told myself I understood that kind of caution. But standing there, waiting for a woman who ran the company I worked for, I realized caution wasn't the same as peace. Caution was just fear wearing a tie. A black sedan rolled in and stopped near the dock door. Valerie stepped out without a driver, without her assistant, without the layer of people who usually protected her from the world. She wore a long coat, hair pinned back, her face set in that calm expression she wore in board meetings, except her eyes looked tired, like she'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally decided to set it down. She didn't waste time. "I read your message," she said as she walked closer, heels clicking softly on wet pavement. Twice. I swallowed, because the urge to say the wrong thing was strong. "I meant it." "I know," she said. Then she glanced around the empty lot like she still didn't fully trust the silence. "This is the only place in the building where the cameras don't have sound." That sentence should have scared me. Instead, it made me understand her more than any confession could. She wasn't hiding because she wanted secrecy. She was hiding because the world punished her for being human. Valerie leaned against a steel support beam, the fluorescent light above us casting clean lines over her face. "Kyle Mercer filed a complaint with HR," she said. "Not about you. About me." about favoritism and unprofessional communication. He attached screenshots of a calendar invite and implied the rest. My stomach tightened. How did he? He didn't have to know anything, she cut in. He just had to suggest it. She paused, eyes narrowing slightly, not at me, at the memory. That's how men like Kyle move up. They don't build. They pry. I felt the anger rise, hot and useless. So what happens now? Valerie's gaze met mine. What happens depends on what we do next. I can shut him down. I can make him regret this professionally. Her mouth tightened. But it would also make the rumor louder. And if I keep you close, they'll say I'm proving their point. If I cut you loose, they'll say you were a pawn. The air between us felt tight with decisions. I don't want you to lose your job, she said, quieter now. Or your name. I know what it's like when people reduce you to a story they can repeat. Something inside me shifted at that, because it wasn't a CEO talking anymore. It was a person admitting pain without dramatizing it. I'm not asking you to protect me, I said. I'm asking you not to disappear. Her eyes flickered, and for a moment she looked almost startled, like no one spoke to her that directly anymore. Then she let out a slow breath. I disappeared once, she said, voice low. Not from a company. From myself. She looked down at her hands, as if checking they were still there. I was married to a man who loved the idea of me. He loved the dinners, the titles, the way my success reflected on him. But when I needed something simple, kindness, patience, honesty, he treated it like weakness. She lifted her gaze again. I decided after that I would never be the woman who needed anyone. It was the first time I'd heard her speak in anything close to a personal truth. Not a dramatic monologue, just a plain sentence that explained years. And then, she added, I sent a message to a delivery driver because I was lonely on a Saturday night and you looked at me like I was a person, not a headline. My throat tightened. The rain began again, light at first, a fine mist. I don't want you to be my secret, I said. And I don't want you to be my boss in this moment. I stopped because words can ruin what silence holds carefully. I just don't want to lie. Valerie pushed off the beam. The distance between us was still respectful, still careful, but it felt smaller than before. Then we don't, she said. We do this the only way I know how, with rules. She held up one finger. First, nothing happens inside these walls. Not messages, not meetings, nothing that can be twisted. If we speak, it's outside. On our time. A second finger. Second, full honesty. No games. No half-truths. If either of us feels the cost is too high, we say it. A third finger. Third, her voice softened. I will not use my position to pull you closer. And you will not let people punish you for something you didn't do. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. And Kyle. Valerie's mouth curved into the smallest, sharpest smile. Kyle will be handled through facts, not rumors. She reached into her coat and pulled out a thin folder. Your audit saved the company millions in penalties. The board will see that tomorrow. And Kyle's concerns will be reviewed the same way, cleanly, quietly, correctly. I looked at the folder, then back at her. You're really doing this? I'm doing what I should have done from the start, she said. Not hide. Not pretend I'm made of steel. The rain grew steadier, tapping against the metal door behind us. Valerie glanced at the dock door, then back at me. Her expression changed, not into something romantic or dramatic, but into something almost gentle. I can't promise you a simple life, she said. I can only promise you I'm done living a false one. My chest ached with the weight of it. I nodded once, because anything more felt like it would spill. A week later, Kyle Mercer resigned before HR could finish their review. Officially, he pursued another opportunity. Unofficially, the board had no patience for men who tried to climb by tearing others down. The rumor didn't vanish overnight. Stories like that linger. But it lost oxygen when it wasn't fed. 2 months after the freight entrance meeting, I accepted a role at a partner firm across town. Not a demotion, not an escape, just a clean line drawn where the old problems ended. Valerie didn't ask me to stay. She didn't ask me to leave. She respected the choice, and that respect did something to me that compliments never had. On some evenings, we met for coffee in places where no one cared who she was. We talked about ordinary things, weather, traffic, books she'd abandoned halfway through. Sometimes the conversation turned quiet and heavy, and we didn't rush it. There was no rush anymore. Not at our ages. Not after what it cost to find something true. The message that changed everything was still saved in my phone. Not because it was perfect. Because it was the first time in years someone had reached out without a script. And in the end, that's what love looked like for two people who'd been disappointed enough to be careful. Not fireworks, not secrecy, not promises shouted into the night. Just a brave sentence sent into the dark, followed by the choice to keep being honest after the fear wore off.